Oh, no, it just ended the broadcast. We were live. Shit.
No, it says we're live on the top.
Oh, I swore. Yes, we are. All right, now I just seen my Facebook feed kind of do an update. So let's see.
Now I see it.
All right, yay. Yeah, I was like going, I don't know. And usually it's there's like a little section there that kind of pops up. So I hit the countdown, but I didn't hit the go live button. Let me know when you're set. Okay.
All right.
We're all set. Cool. I do see some people there. I just wanted to say hello and thank you, Chelsie, for coming and joining me today on our weekly talk show here. My name is Christine. I am with A Naturally Balanced Dog, and today we'll be talking with Chelsie from Raw Rations, Pet Food and Wellness. And so I kind of came across Chelsie's website based on the fact that she does a delivery service for raw food and for your business, which I thought was really a very cool service that you offer, and the fact that it gives you outside of your normal range so that you can service a wider perspective of people. And so that's kind of what attracted me. Plus, you're in a raw feeding group. And I see your posts in there and stuff like that. So I wanted to reach out. So maybe you can just tell me a little bit about what it is that you guys do.
Yeah, so we're located in Sauk City, Wisconsin. We have a brick and mortar retail store where we offer raw food, dry food. We also do specialty pet products. So we do a lot of different hunting, agility, AKC sports, bite sports equipment. And we really try to specialize in everything that people need to be successful when they have not only working breeds, but also just want to do the best that they can do for their pet. So we have a lot of really cool brands. It's not necessarily, the average pet store, but really how we got started and what the majority of our business model still is really providing raw pet food to the Midwest, right? So we have our delivery service that covers Wisconsin and Illinois, and we'll soon also cover into Iowa and Minnesota. And then we also do shipping for frozen food. And then, of course, our retail location where we do a lot of education. We help a lot of people in that perspective as well.
Very cool. So it's you and your husband.
Yes.
Who primarily run the place. And on top of it, I'm going to share with everybody, but, soon you'll be having a baby. Is this your first?
It is.
Yeah. How exciting for you guys.
Yeah.
And so that'll kind of be a little bit more to juggle with everything that you do. So one of the things that I thought was also really cool, because as a person who makes my dog's food, I'm always looking for, different ways to provide, their proteins, and, these certain places have, certain things that you can buy. And so
Right.
you're always shopping around. Basically, you're always looking, where can I find this and where can I get that? And then, how to do it conveniently, because you don't want to be, running all over the place. And so I was like, oh yeah, this is really cool because, she drives not you personally, but, they drive the truck out this way and I can meet them. And that's just a great way to do it. So today our topic is going to be about the importance of, our pet's diet and how that is. So maybe you can kind of just share, how do you feel that, how a diet can benefit the overall health of a dog? Where do you see that and the importance of, your dog's health and well-being?
Absolutely. So I actually do, I have German Shepherds and I do Shih Tzu. And so what's really important for us and kind of how we got here is that when you're interacting with, a dog, especially, one that is an athlete, one of the most important things is that they feel their best, right? And I think people are very much the same way. If we shop in the middle of the grocery store, if you will, and, maybe don't take the best care of ourselves, don't get to the gym like we should, we're really not performing at optimum level. And very much the same thing with our pets. I think it's very important for us to not only think about how the dog, behaves, but also how it feels. And so many times, you'll interact with an owner who is struggling with their pet, and sometimes it's just that they don't feel very good. And so sometimes just changing their diet can really change their overall behavior. So I think it's extremely important, and also just in the longevity of our pets, right? So I think we see a huge uptick, in the last 10 or 15 years in early onset health issues. And so I think the more that we can educate ourselves and do the best that we can, to prevent those things, I think the longer that we get to spend with the animals that we love the most.
Yeah, one of the things that I learned in working with dogs on a day in and day out basis is primarily one of the things that I notice mostly, is as you're going through a training process and you're trying to teach a dog, if you have, and there are a large portion of dogs that have allergy issues, and the owner might not really be aware because maybe they're not really showing these symptoms or chronic symptoms. But I know, like in working with them, you begin to see, the scratching and the itching and things of that nature. But one of the things that I think that people don't really think about is really how that affects them mentally. And when you're talking about behavior, because if you've ever had allergies and have ever experienced it, sometimes you get, brain fog, you can't concentrate or pay attention. You're struggling, it affects their mood. And so definitely I feel that it also, can affect the dog's behavior, from that standpoint. So I'm kind of right there with you. So what do you feel is, kind of, every dog is different, realizing that, but what do you feel is kind of the best diet for a dog?
I mean, definitely the most whole food diet that you can provide to me is the best way that you can go. Again, I always attribute it back to people, right? If we only shop in the middle of the grocery store, we know that we can't feel our best. If we are shopping on the outside of the grocery store and we're maybe not eating 100% healthy all the time, but we're doing the best that we can do, we feel the best. And I think that's the easiest thing to say about it, is because we know as people that if we can add more greens and more fruits and vegetables and more meats into our diet, that's how we feel the best and how we perform optimally, maybe at your job or, at your favorite hobby, or just throughout the day. And I think dogs are very much the same way.
Yeah, interestingly, and it took me, and I just kind of touched base on a point that you made, because really I didn't learn this until later in life. And even though I've been in a grocery store a gajillion times, when you're talking about in the middle of the
Yeah.
aisle versus the onset, you mean are on the outside of the aisles are usually where all the fresh food is on the outside. In the middle is all of the processed food of cereals and noodles and whatever else they might be selling, your crackers and cookies and things of that nature. So yes, shopping on the outside versus the middle. And I am an outside shopper. That's about it. I don't even go into the middle. And I try to pay attention to that, and I think that people who are aware of their own diets are more aware of their animals and pets diets as well. So for those of us who go out and shop, more organically and or into the grass feds, these are things that we kind of think about, also, for our own pets. So, kind of let's touching base on, there's a multitude of different ways to feed dogs. And so one of those is like kibble, kibble food being the little brown pellet food. And so, I don't think that a lot of people are really aware of, because when you ask people about kibble, they'll say that, yeah, I buy a really good kibble. But I think they just think about, different kinds of brands. I don't know that they always know how to evaluate a kibble to say whether it's a good brand or it's not a good brand.
Sure.
And so what is it that you usually will recommend to somebody who's coming in looking for a dry-based dog food? How do you steer them into a more healthful way of choosing and selecting a dog food?
Sure. So, really, what's most important to me when you're looking at dry foods is, understanding what's most important to our customer, right? And so, when you come in and I ask you what's important to you for your dog, does your dog have any allergies? Sometimes that does steer the conversation a little bit, because if you can only feed lamb, for instance, we have to find a brand that has lamb in it. Or maybe if your dog has a sensitivity to flaxseed, we have to look for a brand that doesn't have flaxseed in it. Now, that being said, I think pretty much everybody understands that the less you pay for dog food, probably the quality is different than the ones that you pay more for. Now, that's not to say that you have to spend $120 a bag to get a good dog food, but it definitely is to say most foods that are in that lower price category, you can assume have more fillers, or are from a lower quality of process. And so really what we try to do is help people understand that when kibble is cooked, you do lose a lot of the nutrition in the animals that are in the food, right? And so when you take a normal kibble and you're cooking the lamb or the chicken or the turkey or whatever it might be, you're definitely losing a lot of value. And so the only way you can put that value back in, for it to reach a nutritional standard, is by using synthetic vitamins. Now, separate conversation, right? Synthetic versus whole food. But I think it's important to understand that. Now, going into that, right, then we start to say, do you understand the difference between byproduct meal, and whole meat? And really what I try to do is find the most simple diet that the person can afford, with the most whole food based diet that we can. So we want to avoid as many fillers and byproducts as we can. Also, we do tend to help people try to find a simple grain inclusive diet versus a grain free. And a lot of that is just due to, a lot of the DCM concerns. We really try to help with simple processed grains, right? So oats are going to be one of your most simple that are available in dry dog food. And then, finding a food that has the least amount of byproducts, meals, and fillers in it. So that's really what we try to focus on, based on, of course, the budget of the consumer, and then also what the dog can or can't have.
Right. And I think that a lot of people are, I think they think there's like this always in whatever brand that they're buying, there's this pet chef that puts, this beautiful food together and they put it into a bag. And I think that that's a perception that we really kind of need to work with, and helping people to understand, look, when they're putting these foods in, it's not necessarily the same foods that you're buying in the grocery store.
Right.
And so, one of the things that I always look at is, you can look at the ingredient label, but that always doesn't give you an indicator of quality. And so teaching people how to understand the guaranteed analysis,
Yes.
Based on their macronutrients, and then finding out, I always look at what is the carb load of that particular diet, and how can we offset that? Because carbs, high carb diet, the same for us. It's an inflammatory diet. It can cause diabetes, obesity, and other health issues. So even if you're feeding a kibble at whatever they can afford, whether it's at a lower or a higher level price range, there are things that we can do to increase the nutritional value of that particular kibble. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Yeah. And so what are some of the ways that you might, I don't know if that's a conversation that you have with your clients, but what is it that you would usually kind of recommend? You would have this much kibble and maybe these are some things that you could add into.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the conversations that me and my team, right? I have some great girls that work for me that really are able to help when I'm not available. But one of the things we try to talk about is balance over time, right? So it's no different than shopping at the grocery store. You might still need hamburger helper because you know what? You're too busy to actually cook a homemade meal every night. But it doesn't mean that you don't buy anything fresh because you don't have time to make fresh every day. And so even eating one or two salads a week can help us feel better, look better, and have better like physical health, and very much the same for the dogs. And so if dry food is what works for you, we try to find the best food for you and your budget and for your dog. But then we're also always encouraging you to either consider toppers or rotational feeding, where maybe you are using an air dried or a freeze dried food, or dehydrated. And then, of course, considering your treats, right? So sometimes it's not about
That's
what
a
you're
whole nother
eating, it's
story.
about the treats. So, using freeze dried, or like our Vital Essentials freeze dried section is always a very popular place because there's all kinds of parts and pieces. But giving your dog a duck head versus maybe one of those
Fully
bacon
stick. Yeah,
strips or something,
exactly.
that's processed, can be a lot better for them. So we really try to carry a wide variety of one ingredient or very simple ingredient foods, because even treats can make a difference, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And so, again, I think one of the areas that we need to always continue to try and educate is help people to understand what the ingredients is in the bag and to
Right.
actually look at the ingredients before you shop. Because sometimes I get visitor dogs that come into my house and I always tell them, bring their food and bring some treats for them. So these are kind of the common things that they're used to. And I got to be honest, there's sometimes I look at it and I'm like going, I can't in good conscience feed this dog these,
Right.
treats or whatever, knowing that some of those ingredients can, affect health issues and stuff like that. But, then I always kind of go back and want to kind of talk with them. With that being said, I think the other thing is, you mentioned toppers and things of that, which are great. And so that really works well for like picky eaters.
Yes.
I know like, a couple of my rescues, as I was doing some food transitioning and stuff like that, I was really struggling with a dog that was underweight, and didn't really have a lot of food motivation. And so to get him to eat toppers was real helpful for me to do that. One of the things I also think people are really surprised about is when you talk to them and tell them to put in, table scraps, because one of the things I always laugh when people are really proud of themselves and they say, well, I never give my dog table scraps. And I'm always like, well, that's really too bad, because it's so nutritional. I mean, I'm not talking the table scraps of the big fat meaty part. I'm
Right.
talking about making a little extra and adding it to your dog's bowl to offset that carbs and give it, a fresh, some fresh food into it, to help from a wellness standpoint. And so, again, I think kibbles are, and so let's touch base really kind of quick on dehydrated and
Sure.
freeze dries. And so what are kind of like, the natural progression? So if somebody is feeding a kibble and they want to naturally progress to a better quality, but maybe they need to go step by step. So we talk about kibble, adding toppers to help nutritionally, add some table scraps if they're aware, just adding something to it. And then from there, they can also consider things like dehydrated and freeze dries.
Yep.
So
Yeah. So, I think freeze dried is really easy, especially when you have some of the brands that are on the market where they do make them in little nuggets, right? So you can put a little handful on top of the dog's food. The dehydrated can be a little bit more work, right? Because you have to put water in it, let it rehydrate, and not every dog loves it. But certainly there are so many different variables on the market today of dehydrated, air dried, and freeze dried that you can add a lot of variety, whole food based, that maybe you wouldn't have thought of before. And then, of course, the next step is the raw toppers, where they're making them in kibble size pieces, but they are still raw. So we kind of, a lot of times, I think, jump over the dehydrated or the air dried because truthfully, it is less expensive to add raw toppers than it is to maybe go down the dehydrated or the air dried route. Although if people aren't comfortable with the raw, certainly any of those, dry options can be a great choice.
and also people who travel,
Yep.
you get people, I think sometimes you even get like your vegetarians and your vegans who
Mhm.
acknowledge the fact that their dog is a carnivore as opposed to, and that meat is an important part of their diet, that protein, and to be getting that source from something that is healthful. So maybe using the dehydrateds and the freeze dries and things of that nature. I know when I'm driving, they also make good dog treats.
Yep.
So yeah, as you kind of mentioned, you could take a freeze dried little, patty or whatever, and cut
Yep.
that up and you utilize it as a, soft dog treats for training, or, just good boy treats or good girl treats or
Mhm.
whatever it is for
And
them.
a lot of them on the market you can rehydrate or you can feed as treats. So I think that the companies that are doing freeze dried are doing a very good job at making it available where you can either feed it, you can top it, or you can use it as a treat.
Yeah. And so overall, once you kind of, and I would think that, that we're always looking at least when I look at my customer base, we're always looking at like, what are the ways that we could just do simple steps to move them into a new direction? And they sit on that step for a little while and they get comfortable. And then they start saying, well, okay, I'm ready for that next step. And then
Right.
that next step, and then that next step. So ultimately, the goal would be doing a species appropriate diet, which is based on a raw. So those are some options that you also have.
Yep.
And so tell me a little bit about that, and what are your, what are kind of some of the brands that are more, are more known in your store and for your clientele?
For raw food?
Raw food.
Okay. Yeah, so we actually just added 2 more brands, so up to 20 brands of raw food.
Oh, wow.
And then, yeah, we have everything. And we are working right now on expanding. So, come probably late spring 2022, we will have a larger store, bigger offering. So we are expanding further and continuing to build partnerships so we can also do more parts and pieces in bulk and things like that. Um, but today, I would say some of our most popular brands, and I'll kind of list them from your more commercialized to your less commercialized, because what will happen, right, is that you have kind of two sides of the fence when we're talking about raw. You have those that are pattied, they're nuggets, they're very easy to open, thaw, serve. But certainly they do cost more money per pound. And so if you're feeding, 4 big dogs like I am, maybe not necessarily cost friendly to feed full time in patties, but if you're traveling or if I have a house sitter, certainly patties are much easier for me to just say give them 2 versus weigh out their food and all the things. So I would say we do carry primal, which tends to be very popular, especially with a lot of your newer raw feeders or your topper feeders. um, Tucker's is a really popular brand that we carry in patties. They also add pumpkin, so it actually does a really nice job for a lot of your GI issues for dogs. And they're individually packaged patties. So if people don't want to handle raw food, that's been a great piece for us. And it's made in Wisconsin, which everybody loves. So I would say those are two popular brands. Of course, we do have Answers. We do have Cure, which unfortunately Cure is a little bit unavailable right now because of the environment that
don't
they're
know
in.
quite what's going to go on there yet.
Yeah.
So.
So those are two great brands in the fermented categories. And then as you get into less of the package, well, I guess also we should probably mention like your raw bistro, like so you were mentioning earlier, the grass-fed organic. So we certainly do cover that very well with like your raw bistro, your Bones and Co. One of my favorites is actually Small Batch. They've done a magnificent job offering single protein options for pets who have severe allergies. And they do make patties, or they make rolls. And so where we really find the most bang for our buck is in that roll-based product. And so Small Batch is one of my favorites for specialty. We carry Titan, which is a very budget-friendly option. Albright's is one of our best-selling options that we carry. It is made in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And they do a nice job with single protein as well. So, we do a lot of single protein stuff for raw just because so many pets do have allergies. So yeah, we've got a pretty wide range. And then of course we have a lot of necks and heads and hearts and pieces and parts. So yeah,
And
we have a lot of that kind of stuff too.
I think that's kind of hard for, unless you're like the die-hard. Even me, I've been feeding raw for 20 years and I still don't want to really see the parts. So, I'm happy with the grinds and stuff like that. And back in the days, I also did a co-op. And had brought in some different brands and things of that nature. And so one of the things that, through my own learning experience and stuff like that, in the co-ops, you've mentioned a couple of them, which have like a complete, meaning they are nutritionally complete for all stages of life, versus some of those other ones, they're not really complete. They're only like an 80-10-10, which is 80% protein, 10% muscle, 10% bone. But since I have been formulating food for a while now, one of the things that I've learned, because back in the days, we didn't have all the tools that we have now to learn better how to create diets and stuff like that, was in some cases, those 80-10-10s, they're just not nutritionally balanced. And I think that a lot of people don't really understand that. They're getting this meat and they think it's a complete, where it could really be detrimental to their dog's health if they're not offsetting. So in those particular cases, do you carry any 80-10-10s?
We do. We have a handful of different ones.
And so I usually recommend people, look, if you don't want to kind of balance, if you're going to go with the 80-10-10, then go and get the freeze dry. Things like the Honest Kitchen or Sojo's, or, some of those other brands that might just have the nuts and seeds and the veggies in it, where they can kind of, do an Addamix or something like that to kind of try to help balance it off a little bit. And so those are always, beneficial. And the other thing is certainly rotating the diet to make sure that you're not on a single source protein all the time, because that was the other thing that I was experiencing. I would be always like, look, man, you got to change. You can't buy chicken every single month for your dog for the next, you got to rotate that. And so it's important because, as you said, even if you're buying these single sourced products for people to purchase, if that's all they buy, eventually that dog will likely build a sensitivity or an intolerance to that particular food. And then all of a sudden they're like, my dog's not doing well on that anymore. And so what about transitioning a dog? What is usually your recommend for that transitional period? Do you offer, a customer who says, you know what, here's where I am, I'm doing this and I'm kind of moving there, and how do I transition my dog to that?
To raw?
Sure.
So honestly, it's a lot like transitioning from dry food. Now, what I will say, if the dog has a good stomach, I have typically just cold turkey transitioned the dogs. That's what I'm a fan of. But what I have learned being in this industry is there are a lot of pets out there who are very sensitive. And there's nothing worse as a pet owner than to experience very bad, GI upset for days or a week as your dog's body adjusts. So I used to say that more strongly. Today, I actually don't. I recommend going slow, add some raw in, make sure that the dog tolerates it. And then, very similar to how you transition dry foods, you're going to start with 25% raw, and then you're going to move, 50, 75, and then off of dry food as the dog tolerates it. So every dog is different. I think that's the hardest part, but I never want to turn somebody away from raw by saying, hey, just cold turkey switch them. Generally, dogs recover very quickly within 24 hours, but not everybody wants to go down that road, and not every dog is the same.
Right. And what about puppies? Do you get a lot of people with puppies?
We do.
And yeah. And what is usually kind of the route that you go? Is it any different than an adult?
I would say you can typically go a lot quicker, again, unless you have a very GI sensitive puppy. So, generally speaking, they went from mother to whatever dry food or puppy, mash that the breeder fed. And then they're typically transitioned to sometimes a different food. And then you take them home, and sometimes you transition them again. And then, so the puppy has already had multiple transitions in a pretty short time. So as long as your puppy comes home and has solid stool, I don't recommend switching them as soon as they get home.
Because of the
I like
stress
them to
factor.
settle. Yeah,
Yeah.
because they're already stressed enough coming
Right.
home and leaving their
Because
family, and
stress
yeah,
can
so
cause
take the
diarrhea.
time.
Yeah.
Yep, get them solid, and then, give them a little. If everything goes good, you can usually switch them over in a day or two.
Right, exactly, exactly. So overall, as you're kind of transitioning from one food, whether it be kibble and adding toppers to it or adding the freeze dries to it, ultimately what we're trying to do is strive towards something that is more healthful for their dog from an overall standpoint. And again, with so many diseases that are out there for dogs and whatnot, these are things that I think every dog owner should be really kind of uh, stay on top of. In other words, making sure that, diet, I think, is key. They say, back, food is medicine. They say it for people, and I think it's true for dogs as well. And with the high increase of cancer in dogs, which is kind of another story, because once I remember hearing something about raw feeders that were feeding raw food can also, you have a high carb load in your kibble foods, which is inflammatory
Right.
and somewhat a cancer diet, but also somewhat of that cancer. If you're on a high protein diet,
Mhm.
feeding raw can also be equally um, cancerous if the dog is already in that state. So
Sure.
ultimately, our goal is always to try to improve what they're doing and what we're doing for
Right.
our dog to strive. Now, and obviously working with their veterinarian. So the one thing I think that is a struggle overall is the support that people have on going to their veterinarian if they're feeding a raw or a fresh food diet
I
can
agree.
somewhat be discouraging. And so do you find that to be true? Like, people come in and say, yeah, well, my vet isn't real hip on that. And what is your response generally?
So actually, it's funny. I would say the tide is turning fairly quickly, at least in our area. I have found more often that people will say, my vet told me to come in here and see what you could do for me.
It
Um,
means you're making good progress.
I think so. And I think also a lot of your veterinary professionals are starting to understand that there is more options out there, right? Um, but in terms of the ones who are struggling with their partner that they use in the veterinary field, one of the things I always try to encourage is, you know, if you are feeding an AFCO compliant diet, to let your vet know, hey, I am feeding an AFCO compliant raw diet, because it does meet the same nutritional panel as the dry food that they are recommending. So from that standpoint, I do try to help people understand how to articulate what they're feeding. Now, if they come in and they're on, like you were mentioning, an unbalanced or, maybe an 80-10-10 diet, I do try to help them to understand the risks, right? Because there's nothing more frustrating for me, for a vet, I'm sure for you, than to hear somebody is just feeding chicken thighs to their dog,
Right.
because that is not an appropriate diet.
Right.
And so I think part of it is just that we're all in it together, trying to educate people that it's about balance over time. It's about rotational feeding. It's about being sure that you're feeding a species appropriate, but also nutrient appropriate diet. And if you can't feed an AFCO compliant diet, whether it's for, your own reasons or because of, allergy issues, I think making sure that you're using some sort of a supplement to make sure you are rounding out that diet. You kind of touched on it. There's quite a few different ones on the market even, right? So I know like Dr. Harvey's has a couple different ones. Earth Animal has a really nice daily raw. So, I mean, there's quite a few different like nutritional additives if you are feeding a raw diet that you can do to say, hey, I'm still, giving my dog that daily multivitamin that I find valuable to them, to try to round that out.
Yeah, very good. Well, I'd like to thank you. And again, my name is Christine. For those who might not know me, I am with A Naturally Balanced Dog. I am a canine chef and food specialist and assist people with their pets with diet and supportive supplements. And so you can visit my website at anaturallybalanceddog.com, where you'll find that we offer a custom meal plans for dogs. We also do raw recipes. So there is a membership where we have probably over 100 raw recipes for people to be able to go in, and we can get our supplies with Chelsie over at Raw Rations. So I think I mentioned you have duck wings, so I'm really excited about that. And then we also offer Allergies, which is an intolerance and sensitivity test for dogs that have allergies. So if people are struggling, they have something that they can do. So I want to thank you very much for joining me. It was a pleasure talking to you. It was really very informative. Next week, my guest will be Dana from A Well-Oiled Canine, where we'll be talking about the essential oils and some basic natural remedies for dogs that are experiencing skin conditions and allergy ears and things of that nature. So we'll be seeing you next week. And again, thank you so much, Chelsie. And
Yes, thank you.
it was such a pleasure. So thank you.
Absolutely. Yep. Appreciate it.